when I was building the MVP, it was $20 a month for Replit. Then when I started doing it manually, it was $20 more for Claude. So it was $40 a month for 3 months. And that was my entire investment. Part of this journey has been learning to keep pushing without that gratification. It's like weight loss. That scale is not moving for a month or 2 months, but you just have to keep going at it.
Hey Advait.
Hi, Shaista.
So you built an AI marketing brain to beat agencies at their game. Can you tell me how this AI brain works and who it helps?
Yeah, of course. While I do want to beat agencies at their own game, that there's a point I wish to concede, which is that we'll probably not be able to beat the world's best agencies. And the argument that I've seen people make against AI a lot is that it'll never be as good as humans are.
Yeah.
I think there's a half-truth embedded in that statement, which is that I think maybe AI can never be as good as the top 1% or top 5% or top 10% of humans. But I do think it can be better than the bottom 80% or the bottom 90%. And this is not to say that I think AI should replace all jobs, but like I've worked with AI in education. And there are people who will always be able to go to schools like Dhirubhai Ambani and they will be able to get the best of education. But then I wonder whether AI will be able to help the people who cannot afford that by providing maybe 80% or 90% of that quality at 1% of the cost. So that's my thesis with AI and how I think it can help the society. I had the same thesis with marketing as well, where I feel like there's of course a top 1% or top 5% agencies that are going to do a brilliant job every single time and you're going to get your money's worth. But the problem is these agencies are not accessible to most people, mostly because of the cost barriers. And you end up finding that even for the agencies that are worse than this, you still have to pay quite a bit of a premium for getting the same services without the same level of quality. So that is the gap that I really want to bridge, where I feel like, okay, maybe we'll never compete with the Publicis of the world, but can we get 90% of the way there at 1% of the cost and make that more accessible to a lot of people? So that is the marketing engine or marketing brain that we want to build. And the whole idea is that we can help founders and small business owners who are price locked out of world-class marketing by giving them similar services at like something that they can afford on a regular basis.
So in simple terms, can you tell me what Snapin does today and who it does it for?
So right now, it is a very strong branding and content marketing engine. There's some content automation platforms out in the market already, but all of them assume that you know what you're doing. And that might be true for marketing experts, but that's not true enough for a lot of founders and business owners. So we have a 2-layer platform. The first is brand strategy and brand building. So we have research agents and kind of analysis agents that are loaded with some of the most well-known frameworks in the marketing world. And what they do is they understand the context of your business and what you're trying to build or what your vision for your product is and turn that into a master strategy document that can operate as like a blueprint for every marketing thing that you do. So that includes defining your ideal customer personas, identifying what your competition is and how they position themselves to find like a very strong positioning statement for you that can then come out in marketing copy and what sort of imagery you go for. And then also GTM strategies if that is what you're looking for. I think this is the critical layer that is missing in the market. Like all the automation tools, what they promise right now is that they can go through your website and then generate ad copy or content copies or content images that are aligned with your brand. And it's great, but that assumes that you have an underlying strategy or positioning that is already very, very strong. If you don't have that, then you're kind of missing out on what content marketing is actually supposed to be. So our agents spend maybe an hour, sometimes more, in conversationally talking to people to understand what their business is about and then kind of channeling that vision into an actionable strategy. And the second layer is the content marketing one. So what we do right now is once you have that strategy layer set in, we have agents that automate social media campaign creation. So you could have a campaign running for 2 months and maybe you'll spend 30 minutes again giving the agent enough context to build the kind of campaign you want. And from that point on, it's completely automated. Like you could have a cross-platform campaign that's running for 2 months with 60 kind of posts. And there's a built-in scheduling tool in the platform as well. So you connect your social media and everything is happening automatic and you don't really need to worry about it. until the time comes to review your metrics and adjust things, of course. This stage of the product is meant for founders and business owners who A, may not be marketing experts, and B, who are very conscious of the time that they spend. As a founder or a business owner, you want to spend most of your time building your actual product and not on what do I post on Instagram today or what do I write on LinkedIn today. It's just kind of a huge time saver with like an upfront commitment of maybe a few hours every month.
Is the agent then using that strategy to create the content that is executed?
Yes.
And how much intervention of the founders needed between the two steps?
I've embedded my personal philosophy into the agents, which is that all the critical decisions that are needed, none of them pass without human intervention. So you cannot give an agent a task and come back 30 minutes later and see that it's done. They purposefully built intervention loops at specific points to kind of make the users engage with the agents more as well. And from what we've heard from people, it also helps them in self-discovery. To give a more specific example, when we are building the strategy, before anything happens, the agent gets context of your business. Then it's going to execute research and define your ICPs, your target markets, your TAM, SOM, SAM, everything. And then you have to read everything and approve it.
Why did you feel like this problem was big enough to build a company around it? What gave you that validation?
A couple of things I would say. First was, like, we built a very lightweight value of the product and we took it to some fractional CMOs who operate for companies on like contractual basis. And the feedback we got from a lot of them was that enterprises or large scale companies will probably not see use of this, which I completely agree with. And we don't want to build for them. But a lot of their engagements also come from small size businesses or startups. And they did say that it was a very real problem facing them. So that was the first part of it. And the second was the AI revolution itself, where in the last couple of years specifically, I think a lot of emphasis has been placed on communicating to people that anybody can become a builder. Like you have these platforms like Cursor or Lovable or Replit who say you can ship apps in a week. And while that is true, they do have their drawbacks, and I'll not get into that. There's still the big gap of, okay, you have an idea, you know how to build it, how do you sell it? And that's the hardest part.
Even as a marketer, I resonate with that. So imagine people who are not marketers,
Right.
how they feel about it. So how do you explain Snapin to someone with zero marketing background?
I would say it's like hiring your own brand manager who knows what they're doing, who's not going to ghost you, who's going to stick to their deadlines, and basically take a lot of effort in understanding your business first. So I think that was another pain point I experienced with agencies. When I was engaging with them in my old role, where we would often engage with agencies on and off for small engagements, a lot of times I had to struggle really hard for them to understand what my vision was or what the company's vision was or what we were building towards. And I think that our agents understand that better than most people. So that's the other side of it.
So once you had the idea, what was the very first thing you did the next week to get started?
It's going to sound funny, but the very first thing I did was pay $20 to Replik. And I did that for a month and a half.
By yourself?
By myself, yes. So at that point, this was still an idea. So I wanted to get it to the MVP stage, show it to some people, get some feedback before I even talk to anybody else that, hey, do you want to build this with me?
Yeah.
That's kind of the first step I did. And that was also a huge mistake. So back then, this was in April of 2025 or March or April of 2025. And vibe coding, which is what's the entire age these days, it was still fairly new for me and to the market as well. And I totally bought into the hype of, oh, you can build anything. You don't need to know coding, like all of that. And a month later, I realized that I had built something, but I couldn't show it to anyone.
Could you use it yourself?
I could use it myself, but it was like a petulant child. Like you needed to know exactly what buttons to push for it to behave how you wanted it to. Like nobody else could control it. That was a huge problem. And I also found that even though this application had written all the code for me, I had no idea what any of it did. So if something inevitably broke, I didn't know how to fix it. So then I tore that thing completely down and I started coding it myself. I've never written any lines of code until I started building this. And even if you ask me today, I can't print hello world on a computer screen for people to show. But what I realized was you can't offload everything to a coding agent. Like I had to learn to build with it. And that meant artificially or manually making it stop at every step and explaining it to me, what are we doing right now? So I went to Google Gemini, I went to Claude, and instead of it doing everything itself, I just took some agency on where I was like, I need the platform to do this. How do we build it? And then instead of it doing everything for me, I asked it to stepwise build everything. Like I would converse with it in natural language and it would spit out code to me. So it became more of a translator than anything else.
So you would converse with a Gemini
Yeah.
and then put that into a Replit?
No, then I've had my own kind of, we call it IDE. It's where you start writing code and building everything. So I was asking it to tell me exactly what files to create, what code to copy paste into those files. I just had one simple point of agency that I had where I knew exactly what natural language logic went into which file in which folder in my code base. That helped me create a mental map of everything that was happening. And that kind of helped me define some of the kind of principles I built into Snapin as well, where I don't want it to be a completely hands-off thing where you tell it I need a marketing campaign for a month and it's going to go do something. It's going to be a black box where you don't understand what is happening. And it's going to give you content that looks okay, but then you're not sure whether it's doing its job exactly. So a lot of what I learned from coding agents, I built into this marketing agent where I felt like you need human intervention. You need to take your user on a journey where they know what is happening and where they have some say in changing or steering you in the right direction. I learned coding by working with coding agents. And even if people are not marketing experts, I hope that when they use Snapin, they at least understand first principles and they're able to scale and grow on their own.
So your platform is not just solving the problem for them, it's enabling them so that as they continue growing and scaling their business, they understand and they know what they need, right?
Correct.
So it's educating them also in a sense.
Yes.
So then you remade your prototype?
Yes, I remade it manually in a way. I was still vibe coding, but instead of using agents, I was manually doing some of the work. And that got to a stage where I could demo it to the fractional CMOs or other founders. And that's also when I onboarded my co-founders because I showed it to them and said, do you think this has potential? Do you think this has value and would you like to be a part of it? And then they both said yes. This was in July of 25. And since then, we've been kind of building this. And when I onboarded my tech expert, we tore the entire thing down again because it was good for a demo, but it would not have scaled with real users. Like it should at least be able to handle 50 users, which is not that big a number. But I don't think the old version of it could have done that. So I learned again from him first principles of software architecture more than coding. So it's just been learning things that I never thought in my life I would learn again.
So how long did it take from idea to something that people could actually use?
It took 8 months.
8 months.
So I first had the idea end of March or beginning of April of last year. And middle of December 25 is when we finally opened it up and people could start using it.
Considering that you are 3 founders, once you brought them on board, what did you outsource or bring other people on board for? And what did you manage between the 3 of you at the start?
When you are in such a small team, we went through this whole discussion of pillars and how everybody is going to own this thing and that is their domain. But it ends up that everybody has to do a little bit of everything because you have limited hands on deck. And when something needs more attention, you kind of do it. And that being said, there are some kind of principles we agreed on, which is that we may disagree on something, but one person has the final say. Like even if you disagree with them, you trust them and say, okay, fine, we'll do it your way because you're kind of the domain expert here. My co-founder Ajinkya, who I said has startup experience, everything to do with taking it to market or positioning it and market, branding it, all of that, he had the final say. And then we also encoded a lot of his principles into the app while building it as well. So that's kind of his domain expertise. And then Sumedh, my other co-founder, he is a tech expert and he has final say in what tech stacks we're using or where we are deploying it or what is the best way to solve a particular problem. I think in a weird way, I ended up being the logician where I feel like I understand the customer's pain points and I understand what needs to be done to solve them. And then they're just helping me bridge the gap between A, building it and B, taking it to customers.
So at what point did you start doing competitor research? Because it seems like the problem came out of your own experience and you started figuring out a way to solve it. When did you implement what you are trying to help others implement? At what stage in your journey?
I think very, very early on. When we started, it was mostly a blue ocean. Like there were not many competitors who were doing automated content marketing. I think the biggest one we had at the time was this company called Jasper. And they very strongly positioned themselves as for marketing teams. So we realized that there's not enough kind of options in the market for a non-marketing expert. Slowly, as we were building, we found that people had started entering that space. There's this company called AI CMO that does a lot of things similar to what we are doing. So I'd say they are one of our closer competitors. But we've always been monitoring competition, and we've always been trying to figure out what our messaging or what our strongest positioning statement is. I think one of the bigger changes that happened was in October of 2025 when we were very close to launch.
Right.
Around that time, a lot of products came out who were trying to solve the same problem. So there's this company called TryHolo. There's a company called Omniki, and then Google came up with its Pomeli Labs, and all of them have the same thesis, which is that you enter your website URL and they're going to create a 2-month campaign for you from that website URL. And at that point, we had already invested a lot of time into the strategy aspect of it that I talked about. But that just made us realize that we should focus our messaging more on this part that we are doing, that I still think none of the competition is really doing right now.
Well, one is practice. They're more generalists.
Yes.
You're kind of specializing and moving into one, like the initial stages of the problem, right?
Correct. And I think in addition to that, a lot of people are solving for velocity. Like, give us a website URL. In 30 minutes, we're going to do everything for you. And I think that comes from my, again, personal bias as well. I learned it at my last job where they would prioritize quality over everything. Like, take 1 more day, 2 more days if you need to deliver something, but then it has to be really, really good. So we kind of pivoted in that sense as well, where we don't want to speed up our processes any more than they already are. Like, we firmly believe that, okay, we'll take 3 more hours of your time than our competitor does, but then it will be reflected in our qualities.
So how much money did you put in initially, roughly?
When I was building the MVP, it was $20 a month for Replit, and that was it. Then when I started doing it manually, it was $20 more for Claude. So it was $40 a month for 3 months. And that was my entire investment. When I onboarded my co-founders, we had a discussion about how much money we want to put and how we want it to be used. We are operating from a core thesis in the first 6 months. Like, it's been a very conscious decision that we'll not spend anything on marketing. Like, we want to see organically how much we can grow. And it becomes self-learning kind of for the platform as well. So that's our thesis for the first 6 months. And eventually we want to build a performance marketing pipeline, not just for ourselves, but also encode it into the platform. And that, I think, is going to come from our learning as well. But something we are all aligned on is that we're not taking funding. And it ties into the AI thing I talked about, where I genuinely believe this technology is a great leveler. Like, it does level the playing field and reduce barriers to entry and growth that did exist very meaningfully until fairly recently. Our costs are very, very low right now. Our marginal cost is what we spend per customer, and that is covered by our revenues. So we are in the black right now, and we intend to stay that way. So that might change if we invest heavily into performance marketing, but that's not happening anytime soon.
How did you get your first customer?
Through my network, as it so happens. So we had demoed it to some customers before. One of them was interested and had said that when we launched the full-fledged project, they would love to try it. And so we did onboard them. We got a couple of people to try it out from my LSE network. So they became paying customers as well. And around the same time, I started working with MICA School of Ideas, the business school in Ahmedabad. So I am a strategy consultant for them, helping them kind of define their institutional AI strategy. So they are also going to be one of the customers. Like, part of the agreement I signed with them was that they would onboard themselves onto the platform and give us some feedback. Like, nothing beats learning from the experts. So
yeah. How did you figure out how to price your product?
I think I went back and forth on this quite a bit. And there's a lot of philosophies that you can approach. But I think the one that resonated me with the most was from Alex Hormozi. He has this whole marketing foundational philosophy that he's built his thing on. He was a big kind of influence on me on how to kind of price the product. I decided to go against everything economics taught me and not do cost-based pricing at all. We went with value-based pricing. One of the biggest problems that I mentioned we were solving for was exorbitant agency prices. So we definitely wanted to price it much, much lower than them. But at the same time, we wanted our pricing to reflect what we believe is our value add, which is very high quality and very good strategic depth. So we have 3 plans right now, which is $50 a month, $100 a month, and $200 a month. So all of them get the same strategic stack. The difference is in the volume of content that you can post right now using the different plans. So on the $50 plan, you can get maybe 10 to 12 posts a month. On $100, that shoots up to 50 to 60. And then on $200, we haven't launched it yet, but there's a lot more cool stuff that you'll be able to do with it.
How do you ensure you price it all in to the pricing today without having to consistently fluctuate and change your pricing?
Right.
Your focus.
I've again flip-flopped on this a bit in the last couple of months especially. I thought our biggest bottleneck would be engineering, where AI itself is evolving so fast. And I have a problem that my co-founders hate me for, which is that I want to improve something every day. And even going to market, like launching the product took a month longer than it did possibly. Because I was like, no, I needs to do 10 more things that it's not doing right now. And I felt the biggest bottleneck would be engineering, because to execute this at scale and to keep up with everything that's changing, we probably need to hire a lot more people in engineering. But at the same time, in the last 1 month even, AI-driven engineering or AI-driven software development has improved so much that got completely flipped on its head. So without that need, I'm not sure if our costs are going to increase by that much more, at least until we get to 100 paying customers. Beyond that, I think it's slightly unpredictable for me right now. And to be completely honest, I've not even thought about it. But I feel like we can get to 100 paying customers on a 3-person team.
What surprised you most once people started using the product?
The biggest surprise for me was not the analytical aspect of it, but in a way, the human aspect of it. In the sense that I'd mentioned how friction or a pain point for me was having agencies or whoever freelancers that I'm working with struggle to understand my vision or my product or what we are trying to build towards or what problem we are trying to solve. And the very first customer who used the product said that they felt heard in a way where they felt like this agent is actually making some effort to understand my vision and then trying to codify it into an actionable strategy. So I think that was the biggest surprise for me because we did design it that well. I did not expect it to do as well as it did on that particular front. This came out during our testing as well. We can spend a couple of more minutes on it. So one of my co-founders, he was debuting the final version of the product and he started talking to it as an individual. We were just testing, like seeing what would happen if you try to build your personal brand using the same platform. And he mentioned how about 4 messages in, it had just asked him some questions about his motivations and all of that. And it asked him, are you doing all of this because you want to move to the US? And he said, I'd never told any of it like this at all. It just inferred it from context and what I was trying to build towards to figure out that that's what my end goal is. And he said that kind of blew me away.
Is there something that worked much faster than you expected it to work with your product?
Actually, it's all been slower than I expected.
Oh.
And part of the learning was learning the patience. Today, especially, we are very used to instant gratification.
Yeah.
Like you express a wish and you can have it delivered to you in 15 minutes, or you can order it online, or you can watch on-demand content or whatever it is. And part of this journey has been learning to keep pushing without that gratification. Like you could be working on something for a month and seeing no benefit from it or no results from it or no positive feedback on it. But you just have to trust that whatever decision you've made is the right one. And of course, you have to be willing to adjust and change your course if needed. But the hard part is finding that balance, like knowing at what point do you need to change things versus at what point do you need to carry on. But I think the broader principle still says that you'll most likely not see instant results from this. It's like weight loss. Like that scale is not moving for a month or 2 months, but you just have to keep going at it.
How do you decide what deserves your attention and what doesn't?
It's something I struggle with a lot because I think everybody deserves or everything deserves my attention. And it's what I lean on my co-founders for. And there's a decision framework that was introduced to me recently, which really helps me in prioritizing and choosing what to focus on. It's based on very simple design thinking concepts. And all it does is it forces you to evaluate many options before committing to one or two of them. And it's something I've ingrained into my daily chats with AIs like ChatGPT or Claude as well, where I think because they're modeled after us and we have this tendency of getting anchored in decisions in some way. I think for me, the hardest part is letting go of the first thought I have and actually spending some time evaluating 3 or 4 different approaches to the same problem, and then reasoning through them to arrive at something that I believe needs the most attention.
What's one system or habit that has helped you in your day-to-day?
I think all my answers come back to AI. Like no matter how hard I try to find a different answer. So recently, there's one particular study that gained a lot of attention. It was done by MIT, and that said how people who are using AI heavily or regularly, they have some reduction in cognitive function. From what I hear from my cousins or friends who, especially the Gen Z generation, I feel like they offload a lot of their thinking to AI.
Yes.
Like they're not making decisions for themselves. They are relying on AI for everything. A small day-to-day thing that I do every day is to inject my judgment into everything. Like I might ask an AI, what is the best way to do this? Or what is the best kind of solution to this particular problem? But I always append it with one additional question, which is why. I want to understand why it's recommending what it is recommending or why it is making a particular decision. And then I can interject and agree or disagree with its reasoning, and kind of it forces me to use my own brain more than I had if I had just let it decide for me. I think preserving judgment, it's very, very important because it's very easy and it's much simpler actually to just let someone do your thinking for you.
Yeah.
So
That's why they say AI is making us as a race on the whole dumber.
but it's discipline more than anything else.
What would you do differently if you had to start again tomorrow from day one?
I would approach my co-founders much sooner than I did. I approached them after validating the MVP in a way, after having talked to some customers already. But I feel like they would have sped up the whole process to a large extent, and I would have gotten to that stage much sooner than I did. And we could have been able to launch much sooner than we did as well. My hesitation was on getting some validation for the idea before actually taking it to anybody. But I feel like I undervalued my relationship with them. If I had introduced it to them even in the idea stage, I'm sure we could have gotten to the MVP by working together and done the same thing much faster. So I think that's the one thing I would say.
What's one assumption about startups that this journey so far has changed?
It's going to sound like I am plugging my product, but I would say genuinely my biggest learning was that the building is the easy part. Selling it and making sure customers see the same value that you do is the hard part about startups. You can have a brilliant idea, but unless you know how to communicate to people what your idea is or show them what actually the value you are seeing is, I think the idea is useless. I went into it assuming that I'll spend hours per day figuring out how to build this or how to build that. But I think the hardest part is figuring out how to take this to market.
What's one decision that you're glad you made early on?
I think the best decision I made was moving off of coding agents to do stuff manually, because it made going from idea or MVP to production so much better and so much smoother than it could have ended up becoming. And I'd stick by saying that that's like the biggest learning, and I've embedded that learning into everything I do related to AI right now, which is that I teach and I'm building a platform myself. And in both of them, I tell people that take some agency back and make sure you're grounding yourself in your judgment and not the AI judgment.
What's one sentence you wish struggling founders would hear right now?
As a founder, I think you learn 10,000 things and then you want to tell 10,000 things to people.
Yeah.
But identifying the most, I think it's a prioritization problem that we talked about in a way.
Yeah.
Starting something comes from motivation that has to come internally and not externally. But maybe I can drop a piece of advice that again I wish I had followed, which was that talk to customers as early as you can and listen to them as much as you can. Part of the eventual difficulty will come from listening to which customer and incorporating what feedback. But step 0 has to be talk to people, talk to your customers. They'll give you better feedback than anything you can dream up in your brain.
What's one uncomfortable trade-off founders should accept sooner?
A lot of us don't see it that way, but getting your monthly paycheck is a kind of an addiction. It gives you a high and it's kind of hard to let that go. And trading that off for some uncertainty, but on the other hand, you're getting to work on something you truly believe in or something that motivates you. I think when you're at work, for most people, motivation needs to be external, where money is the motivator for doing what you're asked to do. But in startups, I think the trade-off is that while that money may not be there in the beginning, and it will probably always be uncertain, but everything you do will come from internal motivation, and you're doing it because you truly believe in something or you really want to do it. So I think it's uncertainty versus maybe more satisfaction in your life. That's the trade-off, I'd say.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Advesh.
Oh, happy
Thank you
to-
for walking us through your journey so calmly and so clearly. I think this will be very helpful for a lot of people out there who are looking to start something but just don't know where and how to start, how to use AI, what kinds of steps to actually take to validate their product. So this was very inspiring.
Oh, I'm glad to hear it.
helpful.
And thank you for having me on.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed everybody enjoys talking about themselves.
Yes.
But I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And if I could add one more thing, completely non-commercial. I don't do it for money, but I genuinely love talking about AI and understanding how it can be used to solve any problem that people have. So I will say that if anybody has any questions on just how can I use AI in my daily life, I'd be more than welcome to field any such questions or requests. They can reach out to me directly,
That's awesome.
and I'd be happy to take.
Great, Advesh. Thank you.
Yo, thank you, Tressa.
If you like this video, click here for more conversations with young founders as we dive into the realities of building companies, making difficult decisions, and learning through the process.